Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. I'm Justin Brady, and after a tumultuous housing economy, a lot of people are asking how everything's going to land, if it will land. For first-time home buyers, is this the right time to buy? Is this the wrong time to buy? Honestly, the housing market, real estate in general, just all make me really bored. Or not bored, maybe that's not the best word, but just terrified. I don't want to deal with any of it. I've moved once, and I plan on keeping it that way for a while. So this is for you, because I'm seeing it pop up in the news constantly, and figured we should get an Iowa perspective on it, because the Iowa real estate market is a little different from the national market in some ways. And to explain that to you, Mark Charter of Agency Iowa joins us. Mark, we've been actually talking about this for a year now. Finally got you in the studio. Thanks for coming.
It's been a while, but no, I appreciate the invitation. Chance to talk about real estate.
So let's start broadly and drill into some areas.
Sure.
Get the crystal ball out, dust it off. And in 2025, do you have any major overall predictions on what is it going to be a buyer's market? Is it going to be a seller's market? Do those terms even exist going into 2025 and forward? And then I have so many questions like, how does Iowa differ? What's the status for first-time home buyers? There's some ADU news, which we're going to get into, interest rates, lenders, and even, is your job over? Because is AI going to replace you? So.
Well, hopefully not, right? So we'll enjoy it while I'm here. I would say, so to answer the first question, so is it going to be a buyer's market or seller's market in 2025? And the way that's determined is actually something called an absorption rate that agents do.
Oh my gosh, I'm already terrified.
You're already bored.
Oh, not bored, just confused.
So all an absorption rate is when we look at how much inventory has recently sold in a type of home, say a 2-story, 300 to 400,000.
Yeah.
So how many have sold in the last couple months? How much active inventory is there? And how long would it take to sell through that active inventory based on prior sales? So the number that we come up, whether it's faster than 6 months or longer than 6 months, that sort of thing, that's going to tell us if it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. I would say, based on the evidence that we see now, which will continue on into 2025, it's probably more of a buyer's market than it is a seller's market right now.
Going into 2025?
Going into 2025. We have what I would call a glut of inventory that we've got some great homes out there that just aren't selling. So the real question becomes, well, why aren't they selling? That's what everybody wants to know. The thing that gets blamed the most is interest rates. So interest rates, I know we'll talk a little bit about interest rates, but they're crucially important. And specifically to kind of address what's been going on in the industry for the last year plus has been, we have a lot of sellers that, they're in their homes now. They're not yet sellers that bought their homes and got interest rates at 3.5%, maybe 4%.
Mm-hmm.
They do not want to sell and go buy a home at 6.5%.
Right.
So that inventory is not reaching the market. The inventory that is reaching the market, you still have buyers are like, man, our rate's going to go down. So they start to play that waiting game on, if it just gets to 5.5, then I'll pull the trigger. But unfortunately, it either doesn't get there or it gets to 5.5, and then they think, well, if it only gets to 5, then I'll pull the trigger. So that's a lot of what we've seen. Thankfully, we at least have one unknown out of the picture, which is an election. We've had that. It's over.
Markets don't like uncertainty.
They don't like uncertainty, and humans don't like uncertainty, right? So that's been something that we had been hearing from clients. Well, we're going to wait and see kind of what happens. Well, we know that results now. Now, we don't know the result because we don't know how Trump's going to do once he's back in office. But at least it's, who's going to be the president has been solved. So I would say that, in my opinion, the market's going to remain somewhat balanced. And one of the questions you alluded to was, why is Iowa different? And is it different than other places? It is. So I don't think you're going to see anything drastic in terms of a different market in 2025 versus what we've been seeing in 2024. Hopefully a slightly improved market, meaning some prices get a little bit better, interest rates get a little bit better, demand gets a little bit better, and we just have a better year in real estate across the board. But people still need to buy and sell homes.
Yeah.
That's always going to be the case. It's just a question of, is it the right timing for them? And there's a lot of variables that go into that as well.
And it's a weird housing market is always a bit weird because it almost requires someone to be a loser for someone else to be a winner. And it's, I'm sure there's a better way of framing that.
Sure.
But it's like, if it's a buyer's market, that means it's not a seller's market.
Yeah.
And if it's a seller's market, that means it's not a buyer's market.
Yeah.
So no matter how well, I'm using air quotes, no matter how well the market's doing, that means it's not doing well for someone else, kind of. So like, I'm seeing a ton, even in Iowa here, I feel like I'm seeing just a ton of houses constantly going up. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if that's a national trend. I've been traveling a lot this year, and I feel like it's a national trend. Yeah. So isn't that kind of contributing to the reason we have, did you say we had a ton of inventory and not much of it selling? Isn't that part of the reason?
So historically speaking, we don't have a ton of inventory.
Oh, we don't?
We actually have less than we normally do. So they're trying to
catch up.
We just have inventory that's sitting.
Okay.
Right? So an example, I have a house listed in Ankeny right now that's around $500,000. Great house. In a better market, that house would have been sold. Oh. Right now it's sitting, right? And the showings are few and far between. Why is that? Those are the factors we talk about, right? Well, right now it's winter. Iowa winters are what they are, and that always slows the market down. But then it's interest rates, and the buyer pool is a little bit smaller than it would normally be at this time of year. So, but you talk about the win-wins, right? So when we negotiate deals, you've got someone negotiating for their client and an agent negotiating for theirs, and how do you find win-wins in that? And I would say if you look at it from the perspective of short term, oftentimes people can feel like, I didn't get the best of that deal. But you're the perfect example, right? You bought a house, you've been in it a long time, you don't plan to move. When you go to sell that property 10 years from now or 15 years from now, exactly where you bought it isn't going to be the primary factor that's going to make you feel good at that time, right? Anybody that owns property in Iowa, and I'll specifically say Iowa because we don't have some of those huge swings that other places have, and that owns that property for a significant period of time is probably going to be pleased with the end result because of the annual appreciation, et cetera, right?
No kidding.
So I would say somebody's like, well, I wish I would have bought the house a little less expensive. That's probably somebody that's thinking about selling it in 2 years or 3 years, right? It's not supposed to be a flip game, right? It's a place for you to live, and it's an appreciating asset, but it takes time for that to happen. And we'll probably address one of the things that I'd emailed you over the other day about the difference between owning and renting. But I would say you're in a great position, right? If you don't want to move, don't move. We don't encourage people to move that don't have a need and they love their home and they love their neighborhood. So in the end, no matter how you felt during the negotiation period, in the end, because of your strategy, I think you'll end up being a winner overall in real estate.
So first-time buyers are obviously, depending on who you hear from, first-time buyers are having a tough time getting into the market. Mm-hmm. I would assume it's because, we have a small house. Most people don't know this. We have, I think 700 some square foot above, and then the below is unfinished.
How do you make it work?
Because there's only two of us, and
you like that tiny house trend, probably. That's kind of going around.
We were tiny house before it was cool.
Yeah,
we were tiny house.
Trendsetter, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, when we first got married, we originally looked at this as a starter home. Sure. And then we're like, wait, there's just two of us. Why would we move into something else? Yeah. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so we've just, stuck there. But is there not two questions, I guess, here is there not a lot of inventory like ours, smaller, cheaper homes to get into? Or do first-time home buyers still look at tiny or smaller homes and just say, nah, I want the 3-car garage. I want the 5-bedroom, 3. Because I hear couples of different age levels that just them, no kids or no plan on kids or no kids yet. And they're like, no, we need the 6-bedroom, 6-bathroom house with 20-car garage and a special 10-foot tower peak. It's like, I'm like, what?
Very specific.
Yeah. So is there inventory? Are people trying to get into smaller houses? Do they still want the bigger houses? Is this why people are building a crap ton of the massive houses still? What's going on?
There's no question that real estate has changed and does change over decades, right? There's just different eras in real estate. And there's two things that I think about when you talk about that specific point. The first would be that the entry-level home price has gone up significantly.
It's crazy.
Right? So I don't know when you buy your home, but there was a time when, just using Des Moines as an example, you could go find a small home that you're talking about, and it might be $110,000, $120,000 for something that size. That same home,
and if it was a little bit run down, cheaper than that.
And that home today might be $200,000.
Yes.
To start.
Yes,
right?
it's insane.
So, which is great for you as a seller because your asset is appreciating.
Kind of, right? Because that just means my dollars aren't. Well, I also know my dollars aren't going as far. So it's like, sure.
That's true, right? So I think one, the price has increased. There's no question about that too. Another thing that we see, which might be a bit anecdotal, but all I can speak to is my own experience and the experience of my agents and what we hear. It seems like your average first-time home buyer anymore is a little bit afraid or unwilling to do any work to the home.
Interesting.
So if the home isn't what we'll call perfect, then I don't want that home, right? And we might be talking about, man, if you could just put some tile backsplash up in the kitchen, repaint the house, maybe get a new appliance package for $3,000, this thing looks completely different. And they don't see it that way.
Weird.
I don't know why that is. Now, I grew up with a father that was unhandy, so I kind of lean towards that way myself, but I've learned to do a few things over the years or call the right people to fix those things.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a combination of the two things. I think it's high price point, so it's unappealing, right? This home is pretty small, and it's at a price point that seems like that doesn't fit the home. And then when you were talking about those smaller starter homes, oftentimes they are in need of some repair.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that.
So this is a turnoff.
Yeah, I think so. And then, of course, on top of that, you start to talk about things like, what we associate with being Americans. And yeah, we do want bigger, better, newer, nicer, some things like that. So very rarely when we have a meeting with a client about, okay, we're going to go look for homes. What are you looking for? They're not going to say the smaller the better.
Really?
That is not something we hear.
So
we want a lot of space. We want mature trees. We want yard space. It has to have at least 3-car garage. It has to have at least 4 bedrooms.
What?
And that's even people that are just 2 people.
Yeah.
Because they start thinking in terms like this. Well, what if I need to have a guest spend the night? So we need a guest room. One of those bedrooms has to be an office. So they start using the bedrooms as things maybe other than bedrooms or secondary bedrooms pretty quick, even when you feel like they don't. So very, very rarely, I have yet to meet a person personally that has said, I want to kind of do the tiny house thing. Can you help me find that? I personally have not experienced that yet.
There it is. I mean, there it is. So you're seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but are you seeing, I'll phrase this as a question. This is a podcast after all.
Sure.
Are you seeing a lot of people then, the same group of people saying, housing is unaffordable. Housing, we could never afford to get into a house. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. And also, I want a 5-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 3 garage.
Yeah.
So it's the same group of people that are complaining about housing prices that are also pricing themselves out of the market generally.
Yeah, you have the way that you approach that, I think, is correct in some ways. And it's not just that their wishes are too much or they can't find a house like that. They probably can find a house, but it's not what they envisioned it to be, right? So it's falling short in some ways. And then as we speak right now, the other factor too that obviously is affecting everybody is the inflation, right?
Yep.
It isn't just
Absolutely.
that the price of the home is too much. It's also that the grocery store is too much and my utility bill is too much. And people look at that overall budget, they're like, this just isn't a good time to buy because everything is more expensive right now.
So like tiny houses in general, as you know, smaller houses in general, and I'm not sure if this changes, the market changes, but are kind of fought against from cities. Like cities see lower taxable income or lower taxation, lower property taxes. And cities are kind of like, we don't want that. Like just Des Moines specifically, where I live, there was an issue a couple of years ago, I think, where they were like mandating square footage minimums and mandating garages. And just me personally, my viewpoint, I'm like, no, if I want to build something that's 20 square feet, I should build it if it's my property. Sure. And I was talking to a city council person. They're like, but what you have to understand,
they had their answer.
They had their answer, which, that's fine. Sure. But now we're seeing Iowa City, I think, taking a plan or considering a plan to have ADUs. So it's like auxiliary dwelling units or something. Like you can put a tiny house on your property.
Secondary, right?
Yes.
Make more money through rent or a mother-in-law type house, et cetera.
Is that the key, that it's more money on the same?
It would be more taxation.
Oh, so the reason that city councils and cities may be favorable to ADUs is because overall per property they're getting more income tax.
And it also
it
makes the overall property more affordable, right? If you've got a bedroom to rent or a secondary thing that you can rent and get $1,000 a month for it, and it's in your yard space you weren't using anyway, then why not do that? It makes your mortgage cheaper at that point. Or you have money to pay your mortgage. The mortgage doesn't actually get cheaper, but it makes it more affordable.
Could that
for you.
be then a win-win for people looking for cheaper houses and cities? Because cities get their property taxes, and people looking for entry-level, smaller houses. I guess you couldn't technically sell an ADU because that would still belong to the property owner. But
correct.
Do we see if cities change their rules?
Yeah.
Do we see smaller, tinier houses being popularized, or do you think the market has spoken and people just don't flipping want them?
I think a lot of people don't want them, but what's going to drive a city to change is building permits. So builders drive the real estate economy more than anybody else does because they're building lots and lots and lots of inventory. That's how they make their money. That's their product. So what we have seen is when a builder builds something and it's at a price point that people can't afford and that product is sitting, the builder's going to relook at things and say, okay, I need to make a more affordable home. Well, how do I make a more affordable home? I make a smaller home because if a build is $300 per square foot, every square foot that you take off of that build is $300 less.
And that's generally why everything is bigger, because square foot sells houses, or square foot drives the price up. And if the price is up, the builder gets more money.
Typically, right? So you've seen a few builders, I won't mention any specific names, but you'll see a few builders that build what we would consider a regular house. And then they'll start what's often referred to as a smart series or a first-time home buyer type series, et cetera, which is a smaller home, smaller lot, closer to the neighbor, 2-car instead of 3-car, et cetera. The builder's not doing that because they want to do that. They're doing that because they feel like they need to, because their product is unreachable by a certain segment of the buyer population. So the kind of the secondary housing unit, I know what you're talking about. Occasionally you'll see those in older Des Moines neighborhoods. They might have some. South of Grand might have some stuff like that. Waterbury, some of those cool neighborhoods. And I always think about like a Beverly Hills, right? That's a common thing in places like California where you've got like the secondary structure on your property.
I stayed at a couple Airbnbs in California that were ADUs.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to catch on here. That's my personal opinion. Maybe in a town like Iowa City it might, or kind of, here or there. Across the board, I don't think so. I think you'll just see builders starting to try to understand the market a little bit better. Sometimes builders fall into this trap of building what they want to build, and that's bad market strategy, in my opinion. You got to build what somebody wants to buy.
Do you see builders that get into problems with that? Like, do you see any, and you don't obviously have to name them, but do you see any builders that are like, we're just going to build these massive houses that are sprawling in because I see a lot of this, by the way. Like, the space plan is absolutely idiotic. Like, I look at these space plans, I'm like, were you drunk? Like, what are you, like, this is a hallway to nowhere. This is a stupid nook and cranny that no one can use. Do you see a lot of builders that do a development and then getting kind of hot water and can't sell anything and they're sitting on the inventory? Is this a problem?
Sometimes, yes. And usually if the market has changed significantly, that affects that. But I think the problem that builders run into often, and I'll be a tiny bit sexist here, almost all builders are men.
I was like, whenever your guest says I'm going to be a tiny bit sexist, I'm like, great. Here
towards me, right? So, So
that's okay.
Most builders are men, and I think where builders run into problems sometimes is building from their perspective.
Sure.
So the homes aren't pretty enough. They're not unique enough. They are boring.
They are,
So certain other builders, I'm not connected to them anyway, but like Black Birch is one in our local market that's really successful. The reason, in my opinion, they build a great house, but Black Birch does a great job on design.
Oh.
So people want design, and it doesn't take a lot sometimes to make a home look great versus not. It's, let's do a featured wall here. Let's do, like you have slat wall here in your studio. Let's do something like that. Shiplap. Let's do a bold color. Let's do a color splash is what they call it, or that's one of the terms where the whole room is the same color, including the ceiling. Let's or color drench, whatever the terms are somewhat interchangeable. But I think that builders that are the best builders, that are smartest builders, think about who is likely going to be buying their product and who ultimately makes a lot of the buying decisions on a home. That's something that's not talked about a lot, but I have 20 years of experience doing this.
Mostly the women, right? They make
husband
the call.
and wife tour the home together, right? Almost always the home that gets chosen is the one that the wife likes better.
Sure.
Almost always, because there's something about most men, myself included, they're like, happy wife, happy life. You know, as long as I got my room or my space or my garage or something, the rest of this is going to be more her domain to kind of run and make pretty and all of those things. So, in my opinion, builders should build geared towards women's viewpoats.
Oof.
And a lot of them don't do that.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and so you're saying
in this day and age, is that crazy to say? That's
so what you are saying then is that there is a lot of money builders are potentially leaving on the table by not designing things correctly and not having women's influence in the design room.
I think absolutely women should be involved in the building process, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Right? Scientifically, I know you think deep on these things. Scientifically, women and men kind of think differently about things.
Yeah.
We approach the world a little bit differently.
Totally, yeah.
So to have both involved in a design process, I think is a great thing to do.
And that's like, we did a renovation in our house, and we both had an influence on the property, on the renovation. We both put a lot of effort and energy into it. My wife just GC'd it herself, like just taught herself how to do that. She's like, I think I'm going to do it myself. And I'm like, do you know how to do that?
Well,
like,
I've got YouTube.
I was like, I can't even wrap my brain around that. Like, really?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I think I can do it. I was like, okay. Like she doesn't BS at all. Like if she says she can do something, she can do it.
Yeah.
And she taught herself how to GC, how to do general contracting on YouTube.
Yep.
And she finished on budget, on time. And like, the dudes would come over who were doing the work, and they're like, come right up to me. They're like, so what are we? I was like, dude, I don't know. Ask her. And they're like, but to their credit, like I kind of assumed there would be some in Iowa here, maybe some old sexism. That's what you hear these days.
Sure.
Like, oh, the woman doesn't know what she's doing.
Yeah.
But to their credit, like every guy who came over and I said that to, they're like, oh, okay. And they just started talking shop with her. Like they had no problem. It wasn't that weird to them.
Most of the bad mistakes I've made in my life is because I didn't get a woman's input. And most of the good ones, I women's intuition, or call whatever you want to call it. It's a powerful tool. You should tap into it.
Male, female diversity of thought, like, is a very real thing.
Yeah.
Like, more perspective, the better.
Yeah.
So just to put a cap on the first-time homebuyer discussion then, is there any hope for first-time homebuyers? Like, is there a good price point they're going to be able to get into this year? Is the best solution, well, move to Iowa? Houses are cheaper here.
Yeah.
That's your way to get into them. Like, what's the advice for them? Do they just keep waiting, or is this going to be the year they can finally pull the trigger?
So my advice is going to be general, right? Because everybody is different, and that's why we meet with clients, to understand their goals and what they're actually trying to accomplish. If I run into a buyer that's just antsy to buy a house, and they tell me that there's a good chance they're going to have a job relocation within the next couple of years, I'm probably going to advise them to rent.
Sure.
Because they might lose money because the property hasn't appreciated yet, and they're going to have to pay agents probably to sell it, et cetera. So they might not be in a good position.
Not to mention a lot of your interest payments, aren't those paid kind of up front on the principal?
Sure, yeah.
So you don't even
you'll barely pay down principal at all during that period of time. But here's the thing. I think that, and I'm going to throw this stat at you just so I can get this in for sure. So net worth, this study's out there a bunch. You can Google this and find this easily. The net worth of a homeowner is 40 times greater than the net worth of a renter. Okay, 40 times greater, which basically means if the net worth of renters is something like $10,000, it's super, super low. Okay, it's not meant to shame anybody. Some people want to rent because they just desire to rent. Like, people have their reasons for that, right? But if that's true, if you believe that, then you need to get into the homeowner pipeline at some point, right? And the longer you wait to do that, even if the situation is not ideal for you, the more you push that back, right? Because if you buy a house, it's not the perfect house, and you're there for 5 to 7 years, which is kind of average for a first-time buyer before they're going to go try to buy something else. In Iowa, chances are when you go to sell, you're going to recoup the down payment money plus quite a bit more, right? So now you have some real money to put into that next down payment and to continue that snowball that's built over a lifetime of home ownership, right? I talk to people that are amazed at people that buy a home for $300,000 in cash, right? Or $400,000 or $500,000. And sometimes it's like, well, where did people get the money to do that? I'll use an example myself, and I'll say full well, I've owned some homes that have been fortunate to own, right? But I want to give a real world example of something. I bought my home, not the one I live in now, but I bought my home for $825,000 in 2016. Okay. I sold it in 2024. So that's 8 years. I sold it for 1.1 million.
Jeez.
No improvements. Wow. No improvements to the home. Okay.
That's crazy.
So I'm not going to believe anybody that's like, well, yeah, but you had to pay this and pay that. And like, technically you would have been better off renting. No, absolutely not. Right. Plus I got to enjoy the home for 8 years. And when I sold it, I didn't have to pay taxes on the profit because the government gives us a nice little gift up to $500,000 if you're a married couple.
Wait, what?
Where you don't get taxed.
What's this? I don't know anything about this.
If you own a home for 2 years or 2 out of the previous 5, meaning you could own a home and go to Belize for, 3 years, but as long as you own it,
we all do.
For 2 years out of the last 5, and you sell it and make a profit. If you're a single person, you can make $250,000 of profit that's tax free. If you're a married couple, $500,000 of profit that's tax free. It's one of the reasons the government's trying to encourage homeownership. Of
course.
Homeownership's good for the country. It drives everything else that we do. So where else can you make up to $250,000 or up to $500,000 and not have to pay any tax on that? Homeownership is why that is good. Now, for people that flip, they experience something else, right? You have to pay capital gains taxes because you don't own it. It's not your primary residence. So this is specifically geared towards people that it's their primary residence, it's where they live, it's where they call home, and then they get to make some good money and not have to pay taxes on that. It's a huge incentive to be able to build some wealth through the home. So, and I've seen that for 20 years, right? Not maybe to that extent, but how long have you owned a home? I see it, and then I run an estimate of proceeds for them, and I show them what they're going to walk away with, and most people like that number at the end. And they made money by simply living in the home and going about their lives and having their regular jobs, et cetera. But the money was being made because the property was appreciating the whole time.
Yeah.
That is something a renter will never get. Now, renters have less expense.
And they're also putting money toward the house, which is their property. It's kind of this is going to be bad financial advice. I am not a financial advisor, people, but they're essentially putting money into their own pocket every time they pay their rent, or their mortgage.
Yeah.
That being said, like, if you're buying a house that's way too much than you can afford, that's also a problem as well. That's a whole other topic. That's, go listen to Dave Ramsey or,
and in addition to that, and I'm not going to play accountants here, but in addition to that, there's some other benefits to home ownership, like property taxes being deductible, the interest that you pay in a year being deductible. So the government does a pretty good job of giving you some reasons to want to go buy a home versus rent, other than just the enjoyment of your own property.
Well, and they need to, because, and this is another thing I wanted to ask you about, that the boomers are sitting on an enormous, massive amount nationally of home inventory.
Yep.
And so everybody wants to know, are the boomers just going to sit in that until the day they die?
No.
Or are they going to start downsizing in properties? Based on the boomers I know, they're probably not going to be downsizing. But is the market, are realtors getting ready for this massive, they're going to have a huge impact on the housing market, the boomers.
Sure.
Do you know what kind of impact that's going to be?
So again, what price are they going to be able to attain for their homes, and will the homes be outdated at that point, right? So homes over a longer period of time will double in value. So if you bought for $200,000, eventually that home would be worth $400,000. That's just typically the way that goes. It may be more than that or slightly less than that. But they still have to be desirable homes, right? Where I grew up in Ames, I grew up in a regular home. And then as I drive by that, when I'm back in town now, I just kind of see a neighborhood getting older and older and older. And eventually a neighborhood loses its value in some ways because it just becomes
maybe
too
run
old,
down.
Too old, run down, right? But what do we typically see after that? And not in every neighborhood, but we typically don't see neighborhoods get bulldozed, right?
That's a good point.
We see them get revitalized at times. Think about Sherman Hill.
Sure.
Right? That used to be one of the worst spots in all of
It was
Des Moines.
not great. I remember that.
No. If you want to do drugs, that's, where you're going.
Yeah, that was great.
So, but Sherman Hill, you drive through that now and you're like, this is super cool.
It's insane. Yeah.
Right? And it took one person.
Yeah.
It took one person to say, I'm going to make this house great again. And then that kind of caught on. So I think you'll start to see some neighborhood revitalization, some updates, et cetera. But there's no question. So my belief on boomers, when exactly is all that going to happen? My parents are boomers. My wife's parents are. they want to stay in their homes as long as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and to each their own on that. But you talk about where do you go after that? A lot of them go into assisted living or, you know, new apartment buildings. And a lot of those have been built recently.
Yes.
Big complexes for seniors that have activities for them. And they're not in need of medical care, but they're over the homeownership thing. They don't want to do sidewalks and lawns anymore, et cetera. So we've seen a big boom in that because builders know we're reaching that place where my parents are 76 years old. And especially when you get into that 80s, it's just things change for you, for sure. So will we see a lot of that boomer home inventory coming online within the next decade? Yes, we absolutely will. Will there be some good buys to be had? Possibly. And one of the reasons for that is because they own their homes. So there's more room for them. They don't, well, I have to sell for this because I've got a mortgage to pay off, et cetera.
They can take a little bit of a hit and still make a crap ton of money.
I just need to get done with this. I need to sell this, but I'm still going to walk with $330,000 in cash, which is not a bad thing.
So it could be deflationary.
It could be. I think that you're going to see buyers having maybe a little bit more negotiating room on homes that are specifically that way. Or frankly, in some instances, it's family members that are selling the home. Right? They're selling it for mom and dad. Mom and dad have passed on, or they don't want to deal with it anymore. Maybe don't have the mental capacity to deal with it anymore. We see a lot of that. So the kids, they're not as invested in the home as maybe mom and dad would have been.
What about the ones that are? Like, is this because I've heard this again? I heard this on like YouTube or something. I have no idea if it's true, but we'll end on this here. But for the boomers who are passing down houses, I've heard don't pass it down to your kids. That's really dumb. Put it in a trust first, and then that's the correct way to hand it down so your kids don't pay massive amount of capital gains. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about taxation, and I'm careful when we get into these topics to be like, hey, talk to an accountant about all this.
Absolutely.
But definitely even within my own family, there's some of those discussions, right?
Sure.
How do we get smart about passing down some assets to you? Now, right now, things like inheritance tax are extremely high, meaning someone can pass money to somebody. I think it's around $10 million, maybe per person, without any taxation.
Really?
So it's really the extremely wealthy that are dealing with, how do we deal with these assets? But there's no question that there are taxable elements to those things. Yeah. And I'm not going to claim to be the expert on trusts because I'm not. It comes up in our industry, but I would say if you have those discussions or it's relevant to your family, talk to a CPA, somebody that can say this is the right way to structure this thing. For sure. So I did want to touch on one more thing if I can, just because again,
can you do it in 30 seconds? Because we're way over now. It's a great topic, but
a lot of knowledge here to give on 30 seconds. So. My main encouragement to buyers is to shop their interest rate. Okay. Some lenders out there are great at their jobs, have great reviews, et cetera. But if you can save yourself half a point, 6.5 versus 6, makes a massive difference. So do not settle for the first interest rate you hear. Talk to 3 or 4 banks. Credit unions are a great way to go, but don't settle for a rate. Definitely shop around because it'll help you in a lot of ways.
Awesome. Mark Charter with Agency Iowa. What's the website in case people want to reach out and get more information from you?
agencyiowa.com. We're a truly locally owned independent real estate company serving the entire metro. But yeah, agencyiowa.com, located in Ankeny right now, but serving the whole metro.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast.
Yeah, love it.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa Podcast.